and I probably understand that more than most. It's interesting, as you listen to people's encounters, and this is the one thing I guess I get lost at listening to a lot of other Bigfoot shows, how they put so little value on people's encounters. You can gather so much information from what a witness reports. And tonight's a perfect example of that. My first guest tonight is Jay. And Jay was actually out hunting. As you listen to his encounter, pay close attention to some of the behavior that Jay mentions that he saw the Sasquatch doing. So I want to go ahead and welcome Jay to the show. Jay, thanks for being here tonight. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
And if you would, you had probably one of the best encounters I've ever heard, and you talk a little bit about some behaviors in your encounter that made me really stop and think when we hear different things that witnesses report that Sasquatches do, but we never actually see them doing it. And you were lucky enough to be in a position to see some of the different behaviors. And it made me really stop and think about a lot of things that I've heard in the past about why they do what they do. Well, what part of the country did this happen in?
Yeah, I refer to it as one of my best and worst days of hunting ever. I'm from upstate New York, and back in 1995, I was working down in Nashville, Tennessee. So I lived down there from 1995 until 1998. That's when the big construction boom was going on, and that's where my encounter took place down there, and right on the border of Tennessee and Kentucky. There's a lot of sightings around that area too. I've been looking over the internet and learned that there's a lot more than just me seeing the same thing down there.
Yeah, there is a lot going on down there in that area. What were you doing at the time of your encounter?
Well, I was working for a construction company, and one of the guys I was working with happened to ask me if I wanted to go hunting. I've been a hunter all my life. You know, come October, I'm in the woods until hunting season's over, and I didn't think I'd get a chance to hunt that year because I didn't really know anybody down there and didn't have any land to hunt. But this guy happened to ask me if I wanted to go hunting. He had a big piece of property right on the border of Kentucky and Tennessee, so I was happy to do it. Pumped up because I didn't think I was going to be able to hunt that year.
You were out hunting. Can you walk us into the encounter? Tell us what you saw. Just walk us right into the encounter.
Okay, we got started real early in the morning because we wanted to get set up and positioned, and he drove me halfway up this mountain. It's like a dirt road. They call it a holler down south, or a hollow, or a holler, or something like that. There's like mountains on both sides of the road. No houses down the road, just all woods. And he drove me up the one side of the mountain on his four-wheeler and dropped me off, and he was going to hunt the other side of the road on the other mountain. But I had to walk another half mile after he dropped me off to get to the top. He told me just to follow the cow path, because I guess there's a farmer that leases his land and lets his cows roam free on it. So I got up there, got all set up. I had a ground blind, you know what they are, a little pop-up ground blind.
Right, yeah.
Got that all set up. It was still dark by the time I got set up, and starting to give me jitters just thinking about it. It got light, and I noticed this jet black thing, and I told you before I had a pair of binoculars, a real good set of 12 by 50 Bushnells, and they're on a tripod, so I could see everything real good. There's at the top of this mountain, it was like a bowl, probably a couple acres of, looked like a meteor hit the top of the mountain. There's just like a huge bowl in the top of the mountain. You know what I'm talking about?
There's areas out here in Washington that are like that.
Yeah, I set up right at the edge of the bowl, or whatever you call it, crater, and it looked like they did a lot of tree cutting in that area, like selective cutting in that bowl. So it was pretty clear in there. You could see real good where I was set up. As soon as I got light, I happened to notice everything was green and there was just that jet black. I'm thinking to myself, man, is there bears here? I didn't even bother to ask the guy if there was bears here. I know there is over on the east side of Tennessee in the Smoky Mountains, but I didn't think there was bears over this in the middle part of Tennessee. I know it was an animal because I had the binoculars. I could see fur, I could see skin, and I could see it moving back and forth a little bit. I could not tell what it was. I sat there for 10, 15 minutes watching it. Picture this thing laying on its back with his knees up in the air, but together. That's what I was seeing was his legs, his knees. It looked like a back end of a bear to me, but all of a sudden I was looking at it and it split in two, so I didn't realize it at the time, but after I had spread its legs apart, put his legs back together, that's why I kept seeing daylight between it. So after about 10, 15 minutes, things stood up. I happened to glance back over there, and it was huge, probably 8, 9 foot tall, 3, 4 foot wide. I could see hands, his butt crack, the skin, the hair, his shoulders. On top of his head, he had long hair. He had his back to me when he stood up. At first, I'm freaking out. I'm like, what the heck? I thought a gorilla or something escaped from the zoo or something like that. And I got to watching it for a little while and just couldn't wrap my mind around what I was looking at. It was a huge gorilla-like man.
And what was it doing?
At first, he stood up. He had his back to me. It must have been laying down when I first saw it. I was just seeing his knees and his legs. So I thought it was a bear. He stood up maybe 5, 10 minutes after it got light, and I had watched the thing grab a rock, and he was going from tree to tree, smacking on the trees, and he'd put his head up to the tree like it was listening to the tree or whatever. At first, I didn't know what I was watching, but eventually I figured it out. He was listening for critters crawling around inside. He was going from tree to tree, whacking it with a rock, and putting his ear up against the tree. Finally, he must have heard one because he pushed a tree right over. I heard him make a weird grunting, like noise when it was pushing the tree over. And I seen it like smashing at the tree, and I couldn't really see the tree because of the weeds, and it was laying down after he pushed it over. And then all of a sudden he stood up with what was a raccoon, I believe, a raccoon or a possum or something like that in his hand. And he smashed it up against the stump, sat down, and I watched him bite at it and then stick his finger in the skin and rip the fur off of it and watched him eat it. Freaked me out.
Oh, Jesus, I can't even imagine sitting there. And
I'm telling you, I couldn't even hear, or I was having like tunnel vision, like a panic attack or something, anxiety attack, I guess. I was freaking out. I didn't know what was going on. Thought the thing was going to come up the hill and rip my head off or something.
The tree knocking behavior that you described, you know, we've always theorized that they do that for different reasons.
I hear it on some of the shows, like they think it's some kind of communication or something like that. They're always whacking on trees with bats and howling like coyotes, thinking that they're going to get one to come to them. But I believe it's what I witnessed. They're looking for food. Once he heard that something scurrying around inside after he whacked it with a rock, he pushed the tree right over, started ripping the tree apart to get to the raccoon, or it was either a raccoon or a possum. Couldn't quite tell.
Now, when you were looking at it through your binoculars, did you get a good look at the face?
Oh, yeah. Like I said, it was out in front of me for close to 45 minutes. I got to look at every inch of his body except his feet and lower legs because of the brush. And he looked up towards me quite a few times, but I was in that ground blind, and the wind was blowing right in my face, so he never could have smelled me. I was in a perfect position.
Yeah, you were in a perfect position to view him, especially with the wind and everything.
And I could see perfect down in that bowl. I could see that whole area. I was in a ground blind, and on the ground blind it has like camouflage netting on it. You can see through it from the inside, but from the outside you can't see into it. So I know he never saw me. He looked up my way a few times, but he never acted suspicious, like someone was watching him or anything. I watched him eating that raccoon or possum or whatever it was, and watch him eating some kind of roots and stuff like that. I seen him digging the ground with a stick, eating some kind of roots. After about 15, 20 minutes, I started heading around the mountain towards the way I come up, but it didn't come up towards me. It went out and was going around the side, but it was going towards the way I came up. I'm thinking, man, I don't want to leave here now because I'm scared that thing's going to be waiting for me down there on the trail. So I sat there another couple hours, I'd say, and out of nowhere I hear smash, crash, smash, crash. Sounded like elephants were running through the woods. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this thing's caught my trail scent and he's coming right after me. Next thing you know, a nice-sized deer come running up the hill, big buck deer. And I didn't even think about shooting it because I didn't want to draw no attention to me. Believe me, I was frightened. And 3 doe come right behind him, what's weird about that is the male deer are usually chasing the females, and the male deer was before the females. So I know that thing spooked them deer up the hill. I climbed up a tree and sat there and sat there and sat there. Seemed like forever. We were supposed to stop hunting around 2 o'clock that day. I wasn't leaving. I was up in that tree until someone came and got me because I was frightened. And I've been hunting in the woods all my life, and I've never been scared before. This thing just had me shook. I didn't know what it was. I never heard about Bigfoot before. This was back in 1995. I was 21, 22 years old. I didn't hear nothing about Bigfoot before that. I've never seen like that Patterson film or anything. I never seen any movies about Bigfoot. I didn't know what I was looking at. At the time, I was sure I seen an escaped gorilla, but it didn't really look like a gorilla. It looked more like a man as far as the face.
And can you kind of describe the face?
It had like a wide nose, and it didn't stick out far. It was just like a wide, flat nose, kind of like a gorilla, but it stuck out a little more than a gorilla's nose would. Had small lips. Definitely had big teeth, big canine. You know how humans have the canines?
Yeah.
This thing had the canines too, but they were more noticeable than a human's. Eyes were pretty big. I could see whites around jet black eyeballs. And the face was kind of, I'd say like a black guy's complexion, the skin. And it had fur under the eyes, on the cheekbones, none around the lips, wicked, long, scraggly-looking beard, and long, scraggly hair, kind of like a 80s rock star haircut, but scraggly-looking. Thing had huge muscles. You could tell every time it moved, you could see its muscles under the hair. The hair wasn't that thick on the body, but it was totally covered in hair. But it wasn't thick like that Patterson Goodwin film. That kind of looks thick until you see the close-ups of it, and then you can see the skin. This thing wasn't as hairy as that one. definitely tell it was a man. Had his junk hanging.
That's interesting. What color was the creature?
Jet black, shiny jet black. Like I said, everything was still green at the time down there, and he stuck out like a sore thumb to me. Shiny jet black. Like a black bear. If you ever seen a black bear in the woods, they're shiny, black.
Yeah, they kind of have that.
Got that greasy, shiny coat.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. Is they have that real greasy, oily, and in the sun it just glistens off their back.
Yeah, and in certain spots it was more hairy, and certain spots it was thinner and less hairy. Like on his butt it was less hairy. Could definitely see his butt crack, and I had good binoculars so I could see the skin and cracks hanging off his fur around his butt area. Fingers, fingernails. Creepy. I've been a hunter most of my life, and I'm scared to go in the, not scared, but I get an uneasy feeling if I go in a deep forest area. Kind of ruin my hunting.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all.
Not like I used to.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all.
Not like I used to.
Yeah.
Like I see these people, they're always searching for the thing. No way, I'm never going to go looking for one because I don't ever want to see one again. Even though I feel lucky that I did see it, there's no way I want to see another one. I live not too far out of the Adirondack State Parks, which you can fit all other state parks inside of it. And I've been through most of it, and I've never seen nothing like that before. So I've heard reports of them being up around here, but I've never seen anything. No footprints, nothing.
Yeah.
Another thing that was down in that clear cut area was where they were cutting the trees. There was big piles of tops where they pile up all the treetops. It could have been living in one of them too. Who knows? I don't know.
You know, listening to your encounter, this is why I have a hard time with the people who talk about the paranormal side of Bigfoot. You hear encounters like yours, it's pretty much an animal out there in the woods
doing. Yeah, it's definitely an animal.
Yeah, doing animal things, out there. It was getting food. It was, and they may have a human-esque look to them, but in the same breath, it's an animal. And when you see your encounter, or you hear your encounter, there's no weird stuff going, there's no dimensions opening up. It doesn't have superpowers. It was probably laying there all night, got up, decided to eat something. I like your description, it's just you thought a gorilla had gotten loose from the zoo. And there's no
gorilla is all I could think of, but it wasn't a gorilla. I know that for a fact. Gorillas don't walk on 2 feet, and they don't stand 8-9 foot tall, and the face was totally different than a gorilla. The back, I will say the back was grayish, like a gorilla's is, like a male gorilla's is, but it didn't have a big fat gut like a gorilla, and it didn't walk or move around like a gorilla. It moved like a ninja man. Being how big it was, the thing could disappear and pop up around the next area in seconds, like it was a master of its terrain.
So did the creature just end up leaving?
Like I said, it walked around the side of a mountain, and those deer come up. It was probably 2 hours when it walked around to when them deer came up. I was just sitting there, didn't want to move. After a while, I started packing up, and then those deer come up the hill, and I thought for sure that thing was going to be right behind them, so I climbed right up a tree and stayed up there until that guy he got tired of waiting for me, and he drove up on his four-wheeler. I wasn't going to leave until he came and got me. I told him about it, and he said he left a ladder stand up there the year before, and he came up a couple of weeks later. He don't live there. It's just land that he owns. He hunts. There's no houses or anything there. And he leases the land to a farmer to let cows free range on the field parts. But he come up there to hunt in his tree stand, his ladder stand. He said the thing was all folded up and angled and smashed. He had it chained to a tree. the weird part about it is the chain wasn't cut or anything. The links were pulled apart, like something pulled it off the tree. He couldn't figure out. He thought maybe kids did it, but he couldn't figure out how they pulled the chain apart like that. So I'm thinking that thing wasn't having that ladder stand in its area and decided to smash the crap out of it.
And so did your friend believe you? Did he go, hey, you know what, I believe what you saw?
I don't know. He kind of told a bunch of people at work, and they picked on me for a little while, so who knows? I bet you he never went up that hill without thinking twice about what I told him, though.
Yeah. Well, I believe you, Jay. I mean, your description is just, there's way too many details to your description.
I know they exist, man. I don't think there's a ton of them. I just think they exist in small pockets and good habitat for them. They have a good area where they can stay healthy and stay away from human beings, because there was no houses within 50, 60 miles of this where I was hunting that day. There's tons of caves for it to hide in and stuff. But I never thought about it until still after I seen it. I wasn't sure if it was one. I was thinking it was a escaped gorilla for the longest time until I started researching what a Bigfoot and a Sasquatch was. What I came up with was, what I believe it was a Gigantopithecus. All the pictures that I've seen and all the research on those things, that's what I believe it is. I believe there's small pockets of them still left in this United States and up north in Canada and Alaska. They came across the land bridge, supposedly. I know they still exist.
Yeah, and a lot of people, when they hear your story, they'll think, well, why didn't you pull the trigger? But until you're in that situation, you know,
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about shooting at it. No way. Like I said, I was seeing like tunnel vision. My ears were ringing. I was having an anxiety attack basically for hours. I didn't know what to do with myself. Things freaked me out so bad.
And how far away was the creature from where you were at?
I'd say when I first saw it was probably 150 yards away. It meandered around in that bowl there for, like I said, 45 minutes or so before it took off around the side of the hill where I couldn't see it no more.
Yeah, that's an amazing encounter. And
it was headed right towards the way that I came up. That's why I didn't want to leave. That was the only way I knew how to get back down, and I was too scared to go. Even with a gun in my hand and everything, you know, still scared.
Yeah, and no one can blame you for that. I mean, that's terrifying to be in that position. I bet you felt like a trapped mouse just waiting for the cat to leave so you could get out of there, you know?
That's exactly how I felt. Especially them deer coming running. Usually if a buck's usually chasing the does, and the buck was first. The buck was like, screw this, I'm out of here. You girls can hang out behind me. They must have saw that thing or smelled it or something, and they were high talent. They weren't looking around, looking back. They were just getting it.
Did you notice any smell from the wind coming in?
No, I never got that close to it. The only reason I could see everything so good is because I had them binoculars that day, and I had them set up on tripods, so I was in perfect position. Too bad it wasn't like these times when there's a phone on or a camera on everybody's phone, and like back then there was no cell phones. Well, there was cell phones, but not many people had them.
Yeah.
There definitely wasn't cameras on everything, because that would have been the perfect opportunity to film that thing.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing the encounter.
Yeah, I appreciate you listening. Not too many people will sit and listen to it without giving you a bunch of grief and telling you you're smoking crack or something.
Yeah.
No one, you'll never believe it until you see it.
Well, it's true. You're absolutely right. You'll never believe it till you see it.
If you see one, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But sometimes some of the stories, you don't believe them. No one's going to believe you until they see it themselves. Like I wrote in the email, someday we'll be vindicated, bud. Someday someone's going to get a clear picture or a body or something. I just think there's not too many of them out there. That's like you never see a dead bear in the woods, and there's thousands of bears everywhere. Hell, I've never seen a dead deer in the woods unless I shot it. You know what I mean? They're smart enough to know if they're going to die, they're going to go someplace where, like any animal, where nobody's going to find them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I believe you. You know, it's one of those things, like you said, you had an amazing encounter to be able to sit there and watch it. And like I said, the behaviors that you mentioned, you know, we speculate all the time. You know, I think we've come to the conclusion they do these things, but no one really knows why they do those things. And then you had front row seat.
I never heard a howl or anything like that either, like trying to get a hold of another one. It just kind of seemed like it knew it was in the area by itself and was pretty much content with it. It was a blessing and a curse, bud, because it ruined my nerves for when I go deer hunting, but I'm glad I got to see it, because it's a unique situation that probably I'll never experience again in my life, and it'll be in my mind for the rest of my life, and it made me a knower.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Jay.
No problem. Thank you.
Imagine for a moment, you live in Washington State. You just moved out to this country property. You're sitting on your porch. You're enjoying the country air. And then you see an ape-like creature run across your driveway that isn't supposed to exist. Not only do you see an ape-like creature that isn't supposed to exist, but you see its young following it. And you're really not sure what to make of it. That's what happened to my next guest. Kim is from Washington State, and the area that she's at, we're going to keep it secret at the moment, not to upset the audience, but just out of respect for the witness, we'll keep the location secret. But I know this location very well. In fact, I've had many reports from this exact location. And I'll be heading out to this property to check it out, and I will report back to the audience what I find. But for tonight, I want to welcome Kim to the show.
Thank you, Wes. Thanks for having me.
When did you move into this property?
2 months ago, beginning of May.
And so you moved in 2 months ago. Did you have any sort of inclination that Sasquatch may be around the property?
Well, yeah, I did, just because it's a very heavily wooded area, and it's very remote and secluded, so naturally you wonder what could be out there.
I've actually gotten a lot of reports from that area. I know there's a campground near your property, and I've actually gotten 4 or 5 reports from that campground. Probably the last 6 months to a year I've gotten those reports, and then I've gotten other reports from your area. At the time of your sighting, do you want to tell us what you were doing, and then just kind of walk us into what you saw and what you experienced?
Okay, well, it was just starting to get dark, and I was sitting out on the patio with my little dog on my lap, and just enjoying the breeze because it had been really hot yesterday. All of a sudden, my dog starts to growl, this really low, rumbly growl, and his ears were perked up. And I looked around just to see, what he could be growling at. And the next thing I heard was thundering footsteps coming down the hill behind the house, and it was loud. And I heard it go across the driveway, and the driveway it's just a dirt driveway. And so I put my dog down, and I got up, and I walked over to behind my car, which is about maybe 30, 40 feet from where I was sitting. And I was expecting to see deer running through the woods down the hill below where I was sitting. And I saw this creature. He was standing behind a tree. And I just remember kind of looking at it like, am I seeing things? And then it turned around. It stepped out from behind the tree, and it turned around and faced me and looked me straight in the eyes. And it was eye level to me where I was standing, and it was down the hill, and it had to have been 7, 8, 9 feet tall. It just looked me right square in the eyes, and I remember my heart just froze, and I was thinking to myself, am I really seeing this? Am I really seeing this? And I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move. I was just frozen. A couple seconds later, I hear more thundering footsteps coming running down the hill behind the house. And I looked up the driveway, and I saw 4 more smaller ones crossing the driveway and running down into the woods after the big one. And then they just, like, they were going so fast, they just disappeared. And the 4 little ones were on all fours, and they were moving really, really fast on all fours through the woods. And I remember I thought, oh my God, this isn't real. I'm really not seeing this. And so I walked back up to the patio. I picked my dog up. I grabbed my iPhone, and I went in the house, and I sat on my bed, and I sat here for a long, long time, just kind of going, whoa, did I really just see what I saw? And so then we were telling the owner of the property about this sighting this morning, and apparently this property has quite a lengthy history with Bigfoot sightings.
I'm kind of curious, when you saw the big one, I know it was starting to get dark at the time you saw him. What did you get it, was it more of an outline, or were you able to get a good look at him?
Well, it was definitely, we were face to face. I mean, we were not too far away from each other. From where I was standing at the tree was probably 12 feet from me to the tree, and he was about 12 feet down the hill from the tree. Yeah, I got a really good look at him. I mean, he looked me straight square in the eyes. I could see the color of his eyes. They were kind of an amber yellow color. It was a very stern look. It wasn't, I wouldn't say threatening really, but it was a real stern look, almost like he was questioning what I was going to do next.
Yeah, kind of a scowl on his face.
Yeah.
Can you describe to him in details what you saw? Can you talk about the color and the face and anything that you remember from what you saw?
Well, the arms were really, really long. The fur was kind of a grayish brown or kind of a dark gray. And the face was, there was a lot of flesh on the face, had kind of the nose was kind of flatter. And, you know, I don't know what else to say. I mean, it just stunned me, and it happened just within seconds, and then boom, they went running off through the woods, and they were gone.
The larger one, he was on 2 feet the whole time?
Yep, he was on 2 feet.
Did the little ones ever get up on 2 feet, or were they on all fours the whole time?
Well, I saw them all on all fours as they were coming across the driveway, and then they vanished down into the woods. I couldn't see them really running through the woods. I could hear them running through the woods, the little ones, because I was fixated on that big one, and then the big one turned, and boom, they were just gone. It was just like, whoa, I saw them kind of bouncing through the forest.
Especially when you're not expecting something like that, and you
no,
can't really.
I was not.
Yeah, and it's hard to compare it. I know you're still excited. It's amazing when you have an encounter like that. You're excited, and then in the same breath, I know you probably have sat all day long thinking, did I really see that, or was that a dream? Or did I imagine that?
Yes. Yes, it definitely has been on my mind all day. I just kind of just been sitting there just reflecting on all the different mysterious things that I've noticed were happening, but I didn't know what they were. But now I believe that it was probably them, like piles of rocks. The driveway, the property is up on a hill, and then there's a real big hill right behind the property, and it's really heavily wooded with rainforest, old-growth trees. And the driveway goes all the way around the property in a circle. And I walk around the property, and I notice piles of rocks. It's like somebody put a bunch of rocks in a bucket and then just emptied it all in a little pile. Some of them kind of look like they're stacked up on top of each other. And I'm thinking, what the heck? Where did these rocks come from? They weren't there the other day.
A lot of people listening might think, well, maybe it was your neighbors. But how far away is how close is your nearest neighbor?
We don't have any. It's very secluded. There's not a neighbor anywhere.
Yeah, so nobody would be out there piling rocks or kind of messing with you guys.
No, but you know what's interesting is I have a metal dish on the patio, and it's full of rocks that I stack up all the time, and it's just sitting on the patio. So it kind of reminds me of that when I see these piles of rocks around the property. I just, move them over when I see them. In fact, with the branches too, I see branches that have been knocked out of trees, and they're lying on the driveway. I mean, big branches. And we haven't had any wind or storms or anything here, and so I just don't think much about it. It kind of bewilders me, like, how did this branch just suddenly fall out of the tree?
Yeah, now you talked to your landlord about this. What did your landlord have to say?
Well, the landlord just basically told me that this property has a history with Bigfoot sightings. I guess the BFRO had been here for 6 months doing some research some years ago, and apparently there's also a book that was written about this property, which I don't want to disclose because we don't want to have people descending over here, but it's, from what I understand, a fairly good read if you're interested in Bigfoot sightings.
It'd be nice if the landlord would have mentioned that before you moved in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. We're finding a lot of interesting things out here. Yeah, my dog, too, acting really, really strange the last 9 days. Just really, really bizarre behavior. Wanting to go outside in the middle of the night. It's like we'll be sleeping and all of a sudden he'll jump up and he'll be so upset with whatever it is that he's hearing that he will stand on my chest and then sit on my face and be shaking. And so I turn the light on and, hold him and then kind of move him back over to the other side of the bed, and then he scoots right back over towards me and gets as close as he can, and he's just shaking. So then I turn the light off, and then a few minutes later, he's in, and he jumps off the bed, and then all of a sudden he's like doing circles in the room, and he starts barking. And so I turn the light on, and I try to comfort him, but he doesn't want to be comforted. He wants to go out, so I let him out, and he takes off in the dark, and then I can't find him. And he won't come when I call him, so then I have to sit out on the patio at, say, 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning and wait for him to come back. And usually if I clap my hands, he will come, but even when I do that, he doesn't come, and then eventually he comes. And he'll sit right in the middle of the backyard, the lawn, and he'll just sit there, and he'll make me walk out there to come and get him because it's like he doesn't want to come back in or something. It's really weird.
Have you heard any vocalizations on the property?
Yes, I have. I've heard, it sounds like someone's calling either me or my dog. I hear calling and I hear a lot of movement in the woods behind the house. And a lot of times too, and this is really, really strange, but we'll be sitting out there and we sit outside all the time. We're never in the house. And I go wandering up the back hill by myself, and we'll go wandering up through there just to check things out. I've been up there probably 4 or 5 times, and we'll just be sitting on the patio, and I get this really eerie sense like something is in the woods watching us. Can't put my finger on it. It's like, wow. And John said the same thing. He sometimes feels like there's, like we're being watched, but we can't put a finger on what it is.
Yeah, and that's pretty common, especially in situations like this. I think for the audience out there, so they understand, and again, we're not going to give away the location of where you're at, but, you know, there's a ridge line right behind your home. There's water sources on your property. There's lots of food sources. You know, after you and I spoke, you know, I think, and I'm just guessing, but I think they are sleeping on top of that ridge line during the day and coming down to the water at night, and you just cross paths with them. The driveway, I know, wraps around and around and around that ridge line, and so it makes sense that you saw them coming across your driveway. As, you know, so most people probably don't understand when they hear driveway. They think of a lot of suburban type areas, but this is a different type of driveway this thing crossed. How are you feeling about them being on the property?
I actually think it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool. I am not so sure why they allowed me to see them, because I've only been here for 2 months, when the owner of the property has been here for years and has wanted to see them but has never seen them.
And that's interesting. The BFRO came and rented the property? That's
what I was told, yep.
Did he say why? Was there several sightings out there, and so they were...
Yes, quite a few. Actually, I can't disclose the name of the book on air, but you know the book I'm talking about. Apparently, the family that had lived here before the current owner had quite an extensive experience or contact with the Bigfoot.
Yeah, and be careful, you know, like you and I were just talking about before we went on air. Be careful about feeding them. You know, these things, like I said, like you and I were talking about earlier, in Washington State, we generally don't get quite as many violent type encounters as they do, let's say, down south, but they do happen. These things do have short tempers, and they are unpredictable at times. But, you know, I know people in Washington State, you know, like the Browns, for example, they haven't had anything bad happen on their property, or any sort of aggression, but it does happen. You know, it definitely does happen. That's really cool that you saw the big one and then the small one. You know, most people don't have that type of encounter.
Yeah, I honestly, I feel honored and blessed that they allowed me to see them. I don't know why, per se, but it was, I was really, really stunned, because I had walked over there thinking that I was going to see deer running through the woods, and it wasn't. So it was a big shock.
Well, and these things do make mistakes. I mean, I don't know that it was so much they allowed you to see them. I think probably what happened is they thought the coast was clear, didn't realize you were there, and were making their way down to the water source. You know, and it's dangerous in any situation when you come between an adult and I don't want to say child, but when you know what I'm saying, like you come across like a mother bear and her cub, that situation can go bad really quick. And
yeah, that would definitely go bad real quick with a mother bear and cubs. Yeah, no, I feel grateful that nothing happened because something could have happened. I mean, I was really close to it. Really, really close to it. And I could smell it. And the smell was just like overpowering body odor. Yeah, it was pretty intense. But, yeah, I was pretty lucky, I think, that nothing happened, because the possibility of something happening was really, really great, because I was really close to it.
Yeah, when they're turning back to look at you and there's young ones there, with any animal, really, you make one move and things are going to go bad pretty quick. But it sounds like maybe on this property there hasn't really been any, and I don't know the property, but I'm just guessing, there hasn't been any real aggression on either side in the past. And so that's probably why they were more open. I still think it was a mistake. I think they crossed paths and didn't realize you were there. But the fact that there really hasn't been, no one's popping shots off at them or anything like that in the past, is probably why it didn't really do anything. It was probably waiting to see what you were going to do. And the moment that you just stood there and you didn't do anything, there was enough time to leave the area, exit out of the area. Have you looked around the property for footprints or anything like that?
Yeah, we did, actually. I took the other roommate, and we walked around, and I showed him where I believe they were coming down the hill, and I showed him where they crossed, but it's so dry, you could see like scuffs in the dirt, but we couldn't make out any footprints, but you could see that there was motion there, like something had passed through there, but we couldn't see footprints. It's just really, really dry.
Yeah, especially since the way the weather's been out here lately. It's been in the 90s. I think today it was 95.
Right.
And so it's been so hot. You might go down, check around the pond area to see if there's any footprints around where some of the water line, to see if there's anything down in there. That's where I would go to look if I was out on that property.
Yeah, we talked about that. We have to ask the landlord where that is, because we just don't know. We didn't even know there was a pond down there.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to come check out the property. I'm excited to come out there. I'm excited for your sighting. I know it's one of those weird things that happens in your life, and it's just odd to see something like that. And I'm excited to come out and check it out and see.
Me too. I'm excited to have you come out. I look forward to meeting you.
Oh, the feeling's mutual. The feeling's mutual.
I'll keep you posted if something else happens. Yeah,
definitely keep me posted. And I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your encounter. I know how exciting it is. And if you get a chance, check out some of the shows I've done in the past and listen to other people's encounters and try and gain as much knowledge as you can. And when I come out there, I'll take a look around and show you what little I know, and we'll take a look at it together.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Wes, for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Kim. And that's it for tonight, everyone. Thanks for being here. And as soon as I go out to Kim's property and check it out, I will report back to you what I find. After a week long of fighting this head cold and Bobby fighting tornadoes and bad storms down there, we're finally able to sit down and have an interview. Bobby Hamilton is the co-founder of the GCBRO, and he's also one of the stars on the TV show Killing Bigfoot. And we're going to get into a little bit of that tonight, talking about the show. But I wanted to welcome you to the show, Bobby.
Well, thank you, Wes. I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to coming on here and talking to you and telling some of my encounters and the things that we've come across. We've kind of had trouble hooking up to do this, and I'm glad, the time has finally happened so we can get this done.
No, I appreciate it. And I wanted you, if you would, take my audience back to that day when you were a child. Talk about that night that you had that encounter, or maybe even if there's things that kind of led up to that encounter, could you talk about the things that actually led up to that encounter and then kind of walk us into that encounter when you were a child and you had one out at the window?
Okay. It was 1969. We lived on a farm in East Texas. It was the closest larger town was Nacogdoches, Texas, and it was the other side of Nacogdoches, kind of northeast of there. There's a little town called Garrison. We had moved there. We hadn't been there but a couple of months, and my dad, just so people can kind of understand, my dad worked offshore pipeline, and he was gone the biggest majority of the time. He would be gone for months at a time. Then he would come in for a couple of weeks, and then he'd be gone again for several months at a time. And I'm not going to remember him being gone as long as 6 months at a time, and then come in for a couple of weeks, and he'd be gone again. He was all over the world. He was, in the North Sea and Gulf of Mexico. I mean, he was all over in the pioneering stages of the whole offshore pipeline deal. So anyway, he wasn't there a lot, and we had moved to this farm. I can't, as a kid, I can't remember how many acres it was. I'll have to ask my mom to get this information for future reference. But it was a farm, and it was an old farmhouse. It had a barn. The barn was approximately about 300 foot from the house is about how far away the barn was. And we had, cattle, had a horse. It was just your typical farm. In fact, we had also had chickens. We had a pen inside the barn that had chickens in there, and I don't know if this thing ever got any of the chickens. I really don't know, because we raised them up to where they was the eating size, and then we slaughtered them and put them in the freezer. But my dad had bought this horse for my brothers and my sister. I have 2 brothers and a sister. And when we moved to this farm, shortly after we got there with the horse just went totally crazy. It was the way it acted, it just wasn't acting right. And it was so crazy to the point that nobody could ride the horse. I mean, my dad said, I don't know what's going on with this horse. This thing went crazy. And he took a few shots at it with a rifle one time. I don't know what type of rifle it was. I was just a kid, but because he was trying to ride the horse. My brothers couldn't ride it, and my dad was going, let me show you how to ride the horse. And he's trying to ride it with the horse through him. Well, his temper went through the roof. That may not sit well with some people shooting at it, but I mean, it's just the way it was. Of course, he didn't actually hit the horse. He could have. He's a real good hunter. I mean, I think he was shooting in the vicinity, more than likely right behind the horse. But anyway, he was pretty fired up about the horse throwing him the way it did. But the horse went totally nuts. Well, he got rid of the horse. A lot of things happening around the house. We would hear things at night that, it really, the things we was hearing, it spooked my mom, and she thought somebody was prowling around outside. Nothing was ever really taken that we noticed, but she just, she didn't know what it was, and she would, shine a flashlight outside and turn on the outside light and look, and, never seen anything, but, something was around the house, and, it spooked my mom. And, so the house was set up, get my directions straight here. In the northeast corner of the house was my mom and dad's room, and then if you come down the hall on the left was my sister's room, and the next room down was the boys' room, and then come back up the hall on the other side of the hall from my sister's room was the restroom, and then the other side of the wall from there was the living room, and then the kitchen was, across the hall from our parents' room was the kitchen, and we went out the back door from there, and then the front door was where the living room area was. It went out on the front porch. Anyway, this stuff was happening, and it was, it was really spooking my mom. My sister was a little uneasy, and we didn't know what was going on at the time. And
what kind of things were happening, Bobby?
It was hearing things outside around the house, and things was bumping on the house, and nothing was ever seen, but they knew. Here I was, I had just turned, I hadn't been 4 years old very long. and I've got an excellent childhood memory. A lot of people can't remember things from their childhood. I've sat here and told my mom things all the way back to 2 years old, and she's like, how do you remember that? I'm like, I remember my childhood just like it was yesterday. I remember so much stuff, you know.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of things bumping around outside. You could hear stuff moving outside, but they never seen anything. And I remember my brothers had come in from school, and they was talking about right down the road from the house, there was there's supposed to be this creek that was about 6 foot across from bank to bank, and there was supposed to have been a creature that was lurking around that area that could take one step from one side of that creek to the other and do it in one step and never step down into the creek. It could take a 6 foot stride and step across the creek. And the way they was talking is supposed to be in this hairy wild man type creature. And they took off on their motorcycles. My dad had bought them. My brother, my oldest brother, he had a Honda 90, and then my other brother had a Honda 50. And back then, that was, you know, they were street bikes, and it looks like the old bikes you see on the old early 70s motorcycle gang movies, and riding around in Hondas and stuff is one of those type of motorcycles. It looked like one of those. They went down the road one day, said they was going to go down there and see if they could see this creature. And they went somewhere down this other road off the main road down to where this creek is supposed to be. And they was gone for a little while, and then they come flying back up the road and flew in the driveway, you know, running the house, and they was freaking all out. They said they was down there, and they started, you know, after a little while, you know, they were sitting there and they heard something coming through the woods, and they caught a glimpse of something. They didn't know what it was, but, you know, they was already, you know, giddy and spooked anyway, you know, anticipating what they was going to see. They took off. My youngest brother, he's 7.5 years older than me. His motorcycle died, and the other one had left him, and he looked back and seen him wasn't there, and he turned around and went back and said, here, get on my motorcycle. And he got on it and got it fired up, and they come on to the house. Well, you know, they was all worked up about this. Nobody had put anything together about this might be what's coming up around the house. And it may not have been the same creature. I'm not saying it was, but, you know, nobody put the two together in any way. Mom was freaking out of everything that was, you know, going on around the house. So she would, at times, she would tell us, hey, kids, y'all sleep in here with me in my room. And when she would do that, my sister would sleep, with, you know, in the bed with my mom. My youngest brother, I'll go ahead and say his name. His name's David. He would sleep at the foot of the bed, and there was a window over his head, and that, you know, and if you go by the window, that was the side of the bed my mom would sleep on. On the other side of the bed where my sister was sleeping, there was another window, and myself and my oldest brother, who was, you know, 14 or 15 at the time, I think he was about 15, he was sleeping with me on the floor under that window. And, you know, his name is Gerald. I woke, you know, and it was getting close to the fall months, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't real cool, but it was mediocre cool, and we didn't have air conditioning, so we had the windows up. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I have no idea what time it is. And for some reason, I was scared. I was terrified. And I guess this thing had been watching me, and I woke up with this weird feeling, but I just woke up totally freaking out. And I'm like, Gerald, I got to go to the bathroom, take me to the bathroom. And he's like, just go ahead and go, you know, I'll be here when you get back. I'm like, look, I need you to walk me to the bathroom. I'm scared. And this, you know, went back and forth between me and him, you know, for about 5 or 6 times. You look, please walk me to the bathroom. And he finally growled. He said, just go to the bathroom. I'll be awake when you get back. You know, he kind of growled it out at me. And so I get up, you know, off our pallet that we was sleeping on like a little whip dog, you know, my head bowed down, and easing down the hall, looking around the corners, you know, into the other rooms as I went by to go to the restroom. And I went in there and used the restroom, and the hall light was on, and I come walking back in to my mom's room, and the hall light was on behind me, and I had my head down, and I was just stepping into the room, and I heard a scratch on the window screen, and I'm not thinking anything at all, and I just looked up because I heard this noise, and when I did, I guess it had to be a full moon out because you could see everything out there really well. This thing was right up in the window, and it had this demonic-looking grin. I mean, I seen these teeth, and it was motioning for me with its hand to come to the window. And I looked at it, and my mind absorbed this thing, and it's like, what the heck is this? My mind is just going nuts at this point, and it probably took every bit of about 3 seconds, for me to finally make a move, and I jumped to my left and jumped on top of my David, the one who's about, like I said, I was 4, he was about 11. I jumped on top of him, and I didn't realize what I was doing because I went into just a panic, and I had grabbed him around the throat and was choking him, and I started screaming. Well, he felt me hit on him, and he started trying to raise up, and I'm choking him, and he's trying to get me off. Well, out of his corner of his peripheral vision, he seen something turn to run from the window. And, he couldn't tell what it was, but he seen something turn to run from the window. He finally got me off of him, and I'm all hysterical. I've done woke up the whole neighborhood at this point because I'm screaming, very, very wildly about, this thing in the window. And anyway, Gerald and David, they grabbed some rifles, because, that's what country folks do. We hunt, and we, from a young age, so, we know how to handle firearms and stuff. They grabbed 2 rifles, some flashlights, and went outside. They didn't see nothing. And, they come back in, and, there's nothing out there. Are you sure? Yeah, there's nothing out there. Well, did you look for tracks? Did you do this? I actually remembered asking if they seen any tracks out there. And, they said, you could see where something had been under the window, but, they didn't find anything, and I find it odd, me being a kid, I asked them if they looked for tracks, and I'm like, I'm thinking about it now. That is so strange to be that young and ask that, but I did. But anyway, they didn't find anything. They didn't see anything. And I was living with this fear then. I had this thing in me. Something was in the window trying to get me. It was a short time after that. Well, I had a calf. My dad had bought some cows, and he bought my David. He bought him a bull for FFA, for Future Farmers of America. And it's, they got them into schools and stuff, to teach kids about, farming and, all this stuff. And his project, he was raising this little bull, to show and eventually sell. And when we was at the sale barn, I had asked my dad, I said, look, I want a calf too. I want a calf too. Well, he bought me this little dairy calf, and I named it Smokey. It was it was the most amazing calf. To me, it was like my pet dog. I would pet this calf. I would walk out, and right outside our back porch, you'd walk about 50 foot, and there was the gate. And I would open the gate and walk out there, and make my little whistling sound, like, Smokey, and I'd, come on, Smokey, and he'd be off somewhere in the field, and it'd take me a little bit of doing that, but when he would hear me, he would come running across the field and run up to me, and I'd pet him. He was just like a pet dog, and, I think about it now, it's pretty amazing because, you just don't see that, and kids don't get to experience stuff like this anymore, but, this was my pet, and I've even got a picture of me with this calf, and me standing by this calf, back then, and I need to get it scanned and put it on the website. I woke up one morning, I got up, and of course I was in my mom's room, and I come out and walked towards the kitchen, and she, and I was going to do one of my normal rituals, which I did on a pretty regular basis. I would go out back and holler for Smokey and pet him and just start, being a kid outside. Well, as I was going through the kitchen, Mom told me, she said, Bobby, don't go out to the barn. And I'm like, why? And she said, just don't go out to the barn. And I couldn't understand why she wanted me to go out to the barn. Well, I run out the back door, and I run out to the barn. You know, I'm curious. I want to know what's going on. And as I rounded the corner going into the barn, my eyes picked up on the ground, you know, another horrific sight for a young kid to see. My calf was laying there with his insides. If you walked into the barn, his back was to the left. His guts was pulled out in a pile to the right. They wasn't stretched out in all types of directions. They was pulled out in a pile right there by him, approximately 2 foot from him in a pile to the right. And one thing I didn't say on setting up for this part of the story was my mom and my aunt, we had went to a town called Lufkin and did some shopping, and we come back, it was after dark. We heard something in the barn, and my mom and my aunt, mom went in to grab a pistol and going to walk out to the barn and see what was in there. Well, we followed my mom as she went out there, and we was a little ways back. She was telling us to go back to the house. Well, as they went around into the barn, they heard something growl. And my mom and aunt screamed, and they all ran us back to the house. And I've asked Mom about it many times, and she said that she doesn't know what was in the barn. She didn't see it. But as she rounded the barn and was coming around with the flashlight to shine it in there, she said it was the most demonic growl she's ever heard in her life. And the only thing she could think of was she had to get out of there. See, my mom, she grew up in Oklahoma, in southeast Oklahoma. There's an area up there called Winding Stair Mountain, and you know she grew up in some sawmill camps and stuff back there in the 30s and 40s, and so it's not like she's not familiar with animals and stuff like that, but this really scared. So I should have set that up, before telling about my calf. But my dad, she talked to my dad on the phone. And he told her, he said, take the 2 German police dogs. We had 2 German police dogs. One was named King and one was named Princess. He said, put them in the barn and they'll keep out whatever's in there. Up to this point, these dogs have not raised any type of cane. They haven't barked in the yard or anything else. They've done none of this. They was tied up behind the house, but they've never raised cane at night. She put them in the barn and tied them to the left side of the barn. And where they could stretch out and reach to was just shy of where the calf was. And Mom said, King and Princess, they killed Smokey. Well, if they killed Smokey, why was his back laying towards them and his guts pulled out in a nice pile the opposite direction of where they was at? It didn't add up. None of this added up.
The 2 German Shepherds were actually in the barn while the calf was killed then.
They was in the barn while the calf was killed. And even at that point, we didn't hear any disturbance in the barn. You didn't hear the dogs barking or anything else. And, like I told Mom, I said, and I've talked to her many times about this since. And especially since I've, gotten real serious about the research and everything. And she said, Bobby, those dogs did not make one sound the night that, Smokey was killed. And she said, she goes, I find it awful, strange that they didn't. And because I talked to her and I'm like, Mom, think about how Smokey was killed. Them dogs, they couldn't reach the center of the barn where Smokey was at. Their leashes wouldn't let them reach that far. And she got to think about it. She said, you're right. She goes, that don't make no sense. And I said, well, think about how he was laying. His back was to them and his stomach was laying the opposite direction away from them. And his guts was pulled out in a pile, in a nice, neat pile. If they would have killed him, he'd have been the kill area of the calf, the open guts.
Would have been a mess.
Yeah,
would have been a bloody mess.
Towards them, and the guts would have been pulled out, and they wouldn't have had them in a nice pile.
No.
I mean, these things was not scattered at all. And she said, I never thought about it, but you're right. She goes, that don't make no sense because she goes, we thought that, they had killed the calf. She goes, but, now that you brought it back up and talked about it, she goes, you're right. You know, they didn't kill it, and whatever killed them or killed Smokey, you know, they didn't bark at it. They didn't raise Cain or anything. I mean, and she said they must have been cowering in fear over there while this thing killed your calf. Yeah. And I said, yeah, that's my point exactly. And then that really, you know, gives you a real strong creep factor about how creepy this really is, you know. And anyway, I went through pretty much, you know, my teenage years, and then when I was 18, I had went to see my oldest brother, you know, stayed at his house and was helping him do some work as a painter. And he was out checking on some more jobs one evening, and you know, visiting with some of the clients. And I was talking to his wife, and I was telling her about this thing that I had seen in the window back in 1969 in Garrison. And she said, oh, you've got to talk to Gerald. I'm like, do what? She said, you've got to talk to Gerald. I said, what do you mean? And she said, just talk to him when he gets here. And I said, okay. Well, when he got in that evening, we ate dinner, and we were sitting in the living room and watching TV. And I said, Gerald, let me ask you something. Marla told me to talk to you about this. But I said, in 1969, when I seen that thing in the window, I said, you know, it's pretty much haunted me my whole life. I said, what do you know about that? He said, Bobby, he said, you know, back in that time frame, he said, you know, that a lot of times I would stay in the boys' room. I wouldn't always sleep in Mama's room. And I'm like, yeah, I remember. And he said, well, some of the times when I slept in the boys' room, he said, in fact, on 3 different occasions, he said, at the end of the bed, you'd walk around the end of the little double twin mattress or whatever. You'd walk around the end of it to go to the other side, and there was a window at the foot of it. To the right was some bunk beds. And he said, you know, I was sleeping in my bed, and on 3 different occasions, something woke me up in the middle of the night. And I raised up and looked at the window, and he said, this thing was in the window showing me its teeth and motioning for me to come to the window. And I said, are you kidding me? He said, no. I said, what did you do? He said, Bobby, he said, each time it done it, I pulled a cover over my head, and I would sit there and shake and cry. And he said, I would say, Mama, Mama, Daddy, Mama, Daddy, Mama, Mama, Daddy. He said, I was doing everything I could to scream, but I couldn't get, he goes, I thought I was screaming, but it wasn't coming out loud. And he said, I would sit there and shake and cry, and I would finally go back to sleep. He said, it did it to me 3 different times. And I'm like, you know, I said, I hate that it happened to you and you went through that, but I am glad, because I've been telling people about this my whole life, and people are like, well, how do you remember that from 4 years old? I said, you just gave validation to everything I've been saying all these years, you know, because, you know, and I needed that, you know, because that, I mean, I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had encountered, but, you know, people don't think a kid can have that good of a memory on stuff, and he validated everything for me. And I'm like, this is amazing. You know, I mean, it's awesome. Shortly after the calf incident, Mom called Dad offshore. Of course, they did the radio phone thing when you're offshore back then. And she told him, you either come move us away from here, or we're going to move back to the other house that we just moved from. I mean, we wasn't there. I don't think we was there a year. We was there about 10 months at the most. She said, you either come move us out of this place somewhere else, or we're going back to the house that we left, which was in Livingston, Texas, is where we had came from.
I don't blame her one bit.
Oh, yeah. Mom was having a very hard time with everything then, and she was taking sleep aids to help her sleep. She was a nervous wreck. She was totally a nervous wreck. You had this woman, you know, had 4 kids, and something was around the house, you know, and you know, she heard the growl, this weird stuff was happening, and then the calf got killed. I seen something in the window. I mean, she just told me, she goes, I was a nervous wreck. And I remember, you know, her taking, you know, all these sleep aids and everything else, and she was doing everything she could to sleep so she didn't have to deal with it because her nerves were shot. And we had some friends from down the road that was always coming and checking on us because it was a very crazy time. I watched these movies like, The Legend of Boggy Creek and stuff like that, and the scenes where the thing comes up outside the old house place where you got the women in there and the girl with the baby and everything, and I can relate to that. I can relate to stories of people saying this thing was coming up around our house and, and it was terrorizing this family or that family. I can relate because my family was terrorized in 1969 by one of these creatures. What I dealt with, I'll be honest with you. I'm 50 years old now, and I will not sleep next to a window that is not completely covered. If a shade is up in any way, I won't sleep near it. I don't care. It's a phobia of mine ever since that. And, we go camping in these areas where these things are at and everything, and I'll sleep in a tent. A lot of people may say, "Oh, you're a big wuss." No, really, I'm not. I'm a pretty big guy. I did the professional wrestling thing, and I pretty much can handle my own. But this phobia of this has just haunted me. But I won't even sleep in a tent and unzip the window things, for the mesh netting to let the air through. I'll crack it a couple of inches just to get a little bit of air in there because if I woke up and one of these things was sitting there staring at me inside the tent, I'd probably have a heart attack because that's my biggest phobia of this thing.
And I don't think anyone honestly could blame you for feeling that way, especially going through that as a child. I wanted to ask you, so when I'm of the opinion that these things are not human, that you were dealing with a wild animal, and that, it's a very smart wild animal, but it's a wild animal nonetheless.
Right.
Your description of what it's doing with motioning to you to come to the window is very human-like behavior. And, there's one, I mentioned the cowman story to you, and what happened in that story is the Sasquatch was focused on the little boy. And the little boy would go to his window at night and they'd make faces at each other is how the story goes, which again is very human-like behavior. What do you think its intent was with motioning you to the window? I know you've done all this research and you've had a lot of time to think about it. What do you think its intent was?
A lot of people, they'll have their opinions of it. It didn't mean to do any good. I mean, it meant to do me harm in one way or another because, people, and from my research, talking to people, they're like, oh, well, they have their young and and they'll take human babies to replace the lost young if they lose a young or whatever. And I'm like, well, if this thing wanted me to replace one that it might have lost, then that was harming me because it's taking me out of my natural environment with my family and taking me to some strange deal. But in all actuality, I actually believe it was looking for an easy meal. And it's just something that I've come across from my research.
I agree. I think you were easy pickings.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I'm a kid. I'm not a threat. I'm easy pickings, and it's like my brother. I mean, he was 15. He's a kid. He's a teenager. He's easy pickings. This whole thing about these things being human and everything, people that knows of our group, they know that we actually hunt to harvest one of these things. And back right after the World Trade Center incident, we had a guy come to our camp to hunt with us, and he was placed in a stand, and he shot one of these things, and I believe he might have hit it in the shoulder because this thing has been seen several times since, and it holds its left arm up to it as it runs across the fire lanes and stuff on this property. And, we got the blood and everything, and believe me, we tried to find this thing, but it wasn't an exit wound. It had to hit the shoulder and stop. And, it damaged it, but it didn't tear up any internal organs. I mean, it's still alive. The geneticist that did the testing on this was going to charge is just under $5,000 to do this, like 4,800 or 4,600. I can't remember the exact figure, but the deal was, if it comes up to be human or a known animal, then you're going to pay for it to have all this testing done. Okay, that's fine. The first thing they called back and said was, it's definitely not human. It's like, well, we knew this, because we're not hunting a human, we're hunting an animal. And then they, of course, they tried to match it to all the other known animals in North America, and they said, they couldn't match any of those. And then they tried to match the animals, from Africa and everything else, and they could never find a match on it. It did come out to be, they classified it as an unknown primate, and it fit as a group type, blood group type A is supposed to be the group typing for chimpanzees and orangutans. Group type B is for your gorillas. And this is what I've been told. I haven't did any studying on this. This is what I was told by the people doing the work on it. And they said this is group type A, but it's neither chimpanzee nor orangutan. They, we was talking about, so well, this thing is of a higher intelligence than your other normal creatures, and those are your higher intelligent, monkeys and whatnot, your apes and chimpanzees and orangutans are your smarter, more intelligent, apes and whatnot. So finding out that a group type A wasn't a big surprise, but the thing is, it was neither of those. They said it's definitely a primate, but it's an unknown primate.
It matched closest to an orangutan or a chimpanzee, but it wasn't an exact match. But that's what is that what they were saying to you?
Well, it was the same blood group type. You had, blood group type A, and it was in that blood group type, but it was neither of those. So, it was in the same blood grouping type, yes, for group type A. And, I'm not familiar with all the scientific and medical, terms and stuff on all this blood work and everything, but this is what we was told. We just found it interesting because, of the intelligence level of those creatures, and then this creature is, it's definitely an intelligent creature. It does have some intelligence to it, and, we found that very interesting. But, for people that thinks, well, this is an ancient human and it's related to man and this and that, no, it's not. I mean, we know for a fact, we've had the blood, we've had it tested. I hate to ruffle any feathers on anybody out there that doesn't want one harmed, but, somebody's got to prove this thing exists.
No, yeah, and you're right. And it's going to take a body.
Well, absolutely. And, there's a lot more. There's a bigger picture to this whole thing than just this creature. I mean, people get their feathers ruffled and they don't want Harry Henderson killed and, because it's a big, lovable fuzzy. And no, it's not. Some of the, aggressive displays that I've encountered, it's not the creatures that people say, oh, it doesn't, it's just shy and elusive. If it sees you, it'll walk away. No, it doesn't always do that. And I think, depending on the creature and what circumstance you catch it in, I think they're like humans. You have some humans that are bad humans. They're just mean. Right. And then you have some humans that are very passive and they don't want any confrontation with anybody. They're just very passive humans. But then you have some humans that, man, if you even turn around and accidentally make eye contact, man, they're ready to jump on you and hurt you. And we got prison systems full of bad people. So
yeah, and even primates are that way. I mean, it's amazing. Exactly. Chimpanzees are the exact same way.
And I think these creatures are no different. I think, that, you've got some that are passive, that at all costs they'll avoid, any contact with humans, and you got some that they're just bad. And, you read stories about, like that, was it, that 411 books or whatever.
Right. Missing 411.
Yeah, that's it. He talks, about these kids coming up missing and whatnot. I've always suspected, these things of doing harm to humans if given the opportunity. Because I've always said there was opportunists. And if the right situations, existed, that they would hurt somebody. And, reading those stories and that, it's like, wow, that's interesting. It's eye-opening, and people really needs to take note here on these creatures. People goes out there and, well, I don't carry anything for protection. They're not going to hurt me. That is a wrong idea to go with on these things. You don't know what these things are thinking. You have no idea. And to go out there without any protection at all, that's like going into grizzly bear country and not carrying protection. You may encounter a grizzly bear and it just walks on by, but you may get attacked.
Right.
You're dealing with a wild animal. It's a wild animal, and you don't know what this thing's going to do. And we know more about bears and everything else than we do this creature, and we know bears will attack you. These things right here, you don't know what they're going to do. It's still an unknown. To go out there with a mindset that they won't do anything to you, it's just totally crazy. And for people to say, well, if you got a gun on you, they can sense your intentions and you won't see them. Really? I mean, I've had guns on me every time that I've seen one, except for when I was a kid and I didn't have a gun on me then. It was in the middle of the night. I was 4 years old.
You bring up a really good point. I've never bought into the whole they see your intention thing because, there's so many hunters that run into these things, and they're armed to the teeth and they run into these things. These things don't seem to be too, afraid of running into someone who's armed. Although I'm kind of torn. I still think they know what a weapon is. I still think that they know what a weapon is, but I don't think that's necessarily going to detract them from, if they want to come in and mess with you, they're going to come in and mess with you whether you have a gun or not. I wanted to ask you, though, will you talk a little bit about some of the stranger or maybe more aggressive encounters you've either investigated or you've been out in the field and you've experienced?
I'm going to tell you of a really good encounter we had. It's going to go from one end to another because it was the same area. I had a gentleman with me. Some of y'all may know him because he's done a little bit on some TV stuff. Chester Moore Jr. And he's the editor of Texas Fish and Game. He used to hunt with us, and we had an area in Polk County. It wasn't too far from the Indian reservation, close to Livingston, but it was, a little ways away from there. It wasn't too awfully far, though. We got access to some property where there's, we was told that these creatures had, been there, for years and years, and this one gentleman had built a camp house up there, and he had encounters, and he wasn't going up there anymore. And he said, "Look, you can go up there and do whatever you want to do." And I'm like, "Awesome," So we head up there, and it was Chester and his dad and myself, and we had when we first started going there. The deal was in which we looked around for sign. We seen a few little, interesting things, but we didn't see a lot. And it's like, well, I don't know. So we did a nighttime investigation, and after we look around and everything, we'll sit there at night and build a fire. Of course, it was extremely cold. It was in the winter months, and we'll build a fire and we'll sit there and we'll just listen. For hours and hours, we'll listen to see if we hear anything. And we did this, and early in the night, we heard one sound holler out as it kind of went around going through the bottom, the creek bottom. And it's like, okay, heard it once, and then we didn't hear anything else. And it sounded like it was pretty far off. And it's like, well, I guess it went around us, but we heard something, but, I guess it's all the activity we're going to get. Well, I don't know. It was about 3:30, 4-ish in the morning. It was really, really late or early, however you want to look at it. And we got ready to leave. And I was backed up closest to the fire, and it was one lane in, and they was in front of me. And it was Chester and his dad. And we got ready to leave, and we put all our gear up. I put all the recording, equipment I had up, the bionic ear and my little cassette recorder I had hooked to it, and put up my night vision and got everything in the truck, and Chester and his dad got everything loaded in their truck. And then Chester's dad got a big old 5-gallon bucket of water out of his truck and came up there and we poured it on the fire, putting it out before we left. Well, we got it put out and we was walking back up by my truck, and right as we got by my door and we were saying our goodbyes, to the left of us, and it was less than 50 foot away. You hear this. I said, wow, you hear that? And Chester goes, oh, yeah. I'm like, just be quiet, let's just listen. And then you hear it again. And I'm like, okay, I haven't really experienced this before. This is interesting, so let's see what happens. So I said, I'm going to try something. So I growled back. I go, and when I did, this thing, it goes, and it started working itself up, and it went into that one scream that you'll hear on that movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek, that echoes to the bottoms and everything. It went into a scream that sounded like that, and then it stopped as it started to scream, and it went back down to a low growl. Well, I growled back, and this thing worked itself back up again, and then Chester growled, and then it did it again, and we had this exchange for, I don't know, we probably worked it up about 7 or 8 times doing this. And I'm like, guys, my gun's in the truck. Y'all's guns are in the truck. So if this thing comes on us, one of us is fixing to have to cut this thing, or while the other one gets a gun or something, because this is going to be bad. Because, you don't know what this thing's going to do. And, it was our early stages and early years of research and trying to figure some of this stuff out. Well, after about 8 times of this thing, working itself up doing this, it would just growl that, and it was getting quieter and quieter, like it was leaving. We didn't hear it come up, and we didn't hear it leave. But it was getting further away, and then we just got to where we didn't hear it at all. And we waited a while and didn't hear anything else. We'd growl and everything, and, never heard it no more. And so we left and said, okay, I'll call you tomorrow. We'll, make some more plans of what we're going to do next. Well, the neighbor earlier that night had came over and met us. And he says, hey, I've got this land over here, on the other side of the house, all down through that creek bottom and the other side of that. Y'all are welcome to go over there and do whatever you want to do. I'm like, awesome. This is fantastic. Well, so our plan was we went back, we made a date to go back. So we went, and Chester brought a friend of his name was Patrick. I'm not going to say his last name. I don't know if he wants it, out there. But Patrick was with us, and we went about a quarter mile back off into the woods, down this creek bottom, and it had a whole bunch of pine in there. And we got off in the pines and set up camp. And there was a good area there where we could, had a little open area for a fire and everything, and set up our tent and whatnot. Well, right as it got dusky dark, right at dusk, just before dark, we started hearing limbs snapping all around us. I mean, it was everywhere, but we couldn't see anything. It's like, well, they're here, but I just don't see them, and they're letting us know they're here, and they don't like us being here. And, of course, we're looking, we're, straining our eyes to see any movement. We're not seeing anything. This goes on, for probably about 20 minutes we're hearing this, and then everything got quiet. We got the fire going, everything's set up, we're sitting around the fire, relaxing, and I want to say it was about 10 or 10:30. I can't remember the exact time. I believe I posted the report and I put the times in there when it happened. Back off further down in the bottom, and it echoed through there up our way. If you get a chimpanzee worked up, a chimpanzee will do that type of sound.
Right.
And that has to be noted here, because if you take that and put it in a big old huge gorilla and do the same sound, it's really deep from a big barrel chest. And it's just, I can't even get as deep as this thing, but that sound come echoing out of that bottom. I looked over at Chester and his dad. I said, did y'all hear that? And they're like, yeah, how could we miss it? I said, I have never heard this thing make us, these things or any of these creatures during any of my outings make us sound anything like this. I said, that is definitely a primate sound. And everything was quiet after that. We didn't hear anything else. And it was probably about 1:30, 2-ish in the morning. It was really cold, really extremely cold. And I said, guys, it was about 30 minutes, before I got ready to crash. I went in there and started the tent heater, started getting some of the chill out of the tent. And about 30 minutes later, I said, guys, I'm going to bed. I said, man, nothing's happening. I think we done had all we're going to have happen tonight, so I'm going to crash. Well, I go to get in the tent, and as I'm zipping it down, the zipper goes back up, and here comes Chester and his dad and Patrick. We, get all up in the tent, and I'm sleeping against one of the side walls of the tent. My head is towards the door. Patrick is sleeping with his head at the opposite end, and Chester and his dad's on the other side of him, and their heads are at the other end. And anyway, it needs to be noted, it's extremely quiet. I mean, we're way out in the woods, a long ways from any type of major road or regularly used farm market road or anything. I mean, it is way out. And then you go down a dirt lane, a dirt road, and it dead ends to the place where we're at, and then we're still, at least a quarter of a mile off in the woods from there. And it's in the winter months, and you can hear, it's so quiet, you can hear a little bit of a winter breeze blowing through the trees at times, but it's just deathly quiet. There's no sounds whatsoever. Well, we get in the tent, and it's just a couple of minutes after we all get in the tent, you hear limbs snapping coming towards us. You hear them snap, 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 and they're getting louder because they're coming towards us. And I'm like, well, guys, they're coming to see us. And I said, y'all just be quiet. Let's see what happens. Well, after just, just a couple of minutes, it wasn't long, right in front of the tent, you hear,
Jesus.
I'm like, oh boy,
Yeah,
and
I don't blame you. My God.
And exactly. And I mean, it was right in front of the tent. I mean, if it was 20 foot, it would have surprised me. It was right there. And I had my 44 Magnum laying beside me, and I raised up and turned around, and I had my hand on it and had it, kind of pointing towards the doorway of the tent. That's the area that it was at, is in the front of the tent. And it growled again. And I told Chester, I said, Chester, do not growl back at this thing. He said, why not? I said, because if that thing jumps on the tent, one of us might get shot. I mean, there's 4 of us in here, and if it jumps on the tent, I'm going to start shooting. You don't know what this thing's going to do. Don't growl at it. Well, it growled several times, and we're just sitting there. And I'm not going to lie. I mean, my insides was jittery. I mean, because it's that excitement and adrenaline and everything's all wrapped up. I was nervous. I mean, I get scared like anybody else. Yeah, I hunt these things, but I also have a healthy respect for them because, they're a wild animal. They're very, very large wild animals. So I'm sitting here and my insides are quivering, and I'm just like, oh boy, here we go, and so this thing growled for a little bit, and then it got real quiet, and we didn't hear anything. And I'm like, okay, maybe it moved on. And I eased my head, laid back down. I'm laying there. I've still got my pistol in my hand, and then I hear pine needles slowly crackling under the weight as it slowly put its foot down to try not to make any noise, and it was coming around the tent. And I said, the thing's coming around the tent. And Chester said, how do you know? I said, I can hear it placing its weight real light. It was light as it could, and real slowly as it eased its weight down on these dry pine needles by the tent. You can hear them crackling under the weight of its foot as it put it down. And anyway, I said, it's coming around the tent, guys. And it was a few seconds later, I'm not going to use the word that Patrick used. I will use another word in the term, and y'all will understand the word he used and why I'm not going to say it, on an interview or anything. But out of nowhere, you hear Patrick say, "He's on my freaking head," and it was like a kid crying out in the wilderness for help. When he said that. And
what did he say? It was grabbing his head?
Yeah, it was by his head. And, his head was at the other end of the tent from where mine was. And when he did that, I mean, we're nervous. Our insides are jittery.
Oh, yeah.
With Chester and myself and Chester's dad, Chester Sr., we just busted out laughing. And I mean, we're laughing hysterically. I mean, it's a very tense moment. Adrenaline's pumping. Our insides are jittery and shaky because we don't know what's fixing to happen. But when he did that, it's like this little helpless cry in the wilderness, crying for help, and we just busted out laughing. And amongst the laughter, finally got it. Well, how do you know it's by your head? He said, because I've got my head's laid up next to a root back here, and I felt his foot bump the root. And it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, everything was quiet. We didn't hear anything else, and so we all lay there a while. We talked a little bit, and, we'd listen, and we talked a little bit, and nothing happened. We managed to finally doze off and got about an hour's worth of sleep. And right as it was starting to break daylight, we all come crawling out of the tent and go over and start the fire up and get it going real good. Well, after it got good enough daybreak where we could see, we was going to start breaking down the tent and everything, get ready to leave. And Chester went around back to the tent, and he said, "Bob, you need to come look at this." I'm like, okay. And I walked around there, and 4 inches, exactly 4 inches from the back of the tent, right there in the area where Patrick's head was laying, there was an 18-inch impression back there. And I believe Chester casted it, but there was an 18-inch footprint 4 inches from the back of the tent. That was totally wild. I mean, just the whole adrenaline rush and everything. And, I've been back a couple of times, haven't had no good encounters since then. And of course, the gentleman that owned that property, he sold it to somebody else, so we don't have access to that anymore. But that's another one of the wild adventures that we had.
Yeah, no kidding. Do you think it was the same creature from the night before that you and Patrick were growling at? Do you think it kind of came back and watched?
Chester. Yeah, Chester and I, the one we was growling at.
Yeah.
I believe it was. It was the same growl. It was doing the same growl that it was doing, and it wasn't the night before. It was a couple of weeks before. If memory serves me right, it was at least 2 or 3 weeks because we get the time set up with each other to be able to get back over there at the same time, with our schedules. And, but it was Chester and I that was growling back. And, he brought Patrick with him. Patrick was, one of his good friends that was interested in this stuff, and he came with him along with his dad. It sounded like the same growl that it was doing. So, I do believe it was the same creature. And, we was further back in the woods. And so, it came up closer to us, but it didn't do it till after we got, in the tent all zipped up. And, the thought was going through my head, when it was growling in front, I'm like, well, do I unzip the tent and stick my head out, and try to get a shot with my pistol? What do I do? And, from experience, at that time that I'd already had in dealing with some of these things, if you have one that's like that, that's coming in close and showing some aggressive behavior, if it thinks that you're not scared of it, it won't mess with you anymore. It will not mess with you. And my mind was racing. I'm like, if I go to unzip the tent, it's probably going to run off. And we may not get a chance like this again. So, if we don't come out of the tent, we might be able to come back and be able to set up and get a repeat performance, but be able to have it set to where we can actually see it and it not see us being able to see it. And then we, might be able to get a shot, maybe this way. So, because I've had people ask me, why did you just unzip the tent and go out? Well, I didn't want to let this thing realize, hey, these cats may not be scared of me, so, I'm not going to mess with them.
Well, and the other thing, too, I don't think people quite understand, because I've heard the growl, too, and it kind of threw me when your mother had said it was a demonic growl, because really that's how I have said that's the type of growl I remember. I remember it being kind of a demonic growl and enough to shake you up. And when you're sitting in the tent, this thing comes right up and starts growling at you. I find it interesting. It waited till all of you guys went in the tent and then came up. It probably sat and watched you guys all go in the tent, then decided to come play the tough guy routine of coming up and growling on you guys.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, because, we was all out around the fire, and we didn't put the fire out. I mean, we was in an area, the way it was cleared out where the fire wasn't, it was contained. It was and we had our own little, I guess you would kind of call it a fire pit in a way, the way we had, some stones and stuff around it to where the fire was contained. It wasn't going to get out. So we, and it had burned down pretty low. And so we just, left it and went to get in the tent. And so, I mean, it's sitting out there in the woods, and, as soon as we all got in the tent and got settled, you could hear it coming. It started breaking limbs coming through the woods towards us. And there's no doubt it sat out there and watched us till everybody got in the tent. And then, it let us know it was coming. It was making noise. And, it was a very interesting encounter. It's one of the more exciting ones that I like to tell, because people's like, oh, I'll do this and that. Okay. I've had grown men with me in camp on some of my outings, and these things have came up, and they had to leave at 3 a.m, and they won't go back. I mean,
Yeah.
So, you don't know what you're going to do until you have some of this stuff happen to you. And I always tell people, I have a strong desire for answers, and that's why I do this. And, and I have people say, well, I'd leave, I'd run. I'm like, why do you run from something you're trying to find? To me, that's never made any sense. Do I get spooked? Yeah, I get spooked. I mean, you're dealing with something that's still an unknown, but don't run from something that you're looking for. I mean, that's not how you find something. And like I said, I've had grown men that's left in the middle of the night, and they won't come back. It's just too much for them to deal with.
This is part 1 of a 2-part interview with Bobby Hamilton. Hope everyone can join us tomorrow night as we wrap it up with Bobby. He's going to be sharing some more encounter stories with us, along with going into his TV show, Killing Bigfoot. Until tomorrow night, everyone, I hope you have a great night. Hope you enjoyed the show, and I will see you tomorrow night.